check out this tiny segment from the 2015 Dietary Guidelines for Americans meeting. There's a link in the description down below to the full-length video. A lot of people are for the plant-based diet. You know, I've said before that the vegan community is growing, so, you know, is 2015 going to be the year that we finally actually get real recommendations that will make people healthy? Let me know down in the comments down below. Check it out.
Our second presenter today is Susan Levin from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Please begin.
Thank you. Since the last dietary guidelines, my organization has been assessing the research showing the ill effects of consuming red and processed meat products and dairy products, two areas of weakness in the guidelines that are otherwise increasingly more evidence-based. In 2011, the World Cancer Research Fund noted that there is convincing evidence, the strongest language possible, that the consumption of red and processed meat products is linked to colorectal cancer. In 2012, a meta-analysis continued to build on this declaration and found that the risk of colorectal cancer increased by 30 to 50% with the consumption of red and processed meat products. Two other meta-analyses conducted by the Imperial College of London found similar associations with red and processed meat product consumption and its link to colorectal cancer as well as tumors. In addition to these numerous reviews, there have been several epidemiological studies published since the last dietary guidelines, including findings from the Cancer Prevention Study 2, the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, the Nurses Health Study, and the EPIC study showing red and processed meat linked to all causes of death, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. In light of the overwhelming evidence related to red and processed meat product consumption and illness, the British government altered its dietary guidelines for the first time in 13 years to explicitly advise against overconsumption of red and processed meats. The World Cancer Research Fund says there is no safe amount of processed meat to consume and recommends children should never eat these products. The 2015 dietary guidelines should use the same explicit and forthright language to help protect the health of American consumers and to clarify any confusion about appropriate protein choices. I would secondly encourage the esteemed committee to stop allowing the dietary guidelines to promote the consumption of dairy products as an essential food. Although the guidelines recommend replacing high-fat dairy products with low-fat versions, most consumers continue to eat high-fat dairy products such as cheese, the #1 source of saturated fat in our diets, according to the last guidelines. Low-fat dairy, however, is hardly ideal either. A large study published last year found that overweight and obese children were more likely to drink low-fat milk. Reviews and large long-term studies, including the Physicians Health Study, have concluded that milk product consumption has a dose-response relationship with prostate cancer risk, perhaps even more so with low-fat versions of the product. Other diseases have also been linked to dairy product consumption, including breast cancer and other cancers of the reproductive system. Healthier, more absorbable forms of calcium can be found in leafy green vegetables, beans, and other plant foods, which offer overall better protection of one's entire health profile. The guidelines should do its best to steer Americans to the healthiest possible choices for nutrients, not the products where one must first consider the risks before assessing the benefits. And for your convenience, I have brought all these studies I've referenced for your review. Thank you.
Our fourth presenter is Michael Greger, nutritionfacts.org.
In the Permanente Journal last year, the official peer-reviewed publication of our nation's largest managed care organization, they published a nutrition update for physicians in which they concluded healthy eating may be best achieved with a plant-based diet, which they define as a diet that encourages whole plant foods, discourages meat, dairy, eggs, and empty-calorie junk. They conclude physicians should consider recommending a plant-based diet to all their patients, especially those with high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity, which describes a large bulk, of course, of our population. This sentiment was echoed by the American Institute for Cancer Research last year when they explicitly endorsed a diet revolving around whole plant foods, vegetables, whole grains, fruits, and beans. I've personally been eating a plant-rich diet since 1990 when Dr. Dean Ornish published his lifestyle heart trial in the Lancet angiographically proving that we can reverse heart disease with the help of a plant-based diet, opening of arteries without drugs, without surgery, and if that's all a plant-based diet could do, reverse our #1 killer of men and women. I'm thinking, well, shouldn't that be the default diet until otherwise proven? And the fact that it can also help prevent, treat, and arrest other top killers like type 2 diabetes and hypertension would seem to make the case overwhelming. Now, to the last guideline committee's credit, the 2010 guidelines were a leap in the right direction, recognizing food as a package deal. Yes, there's calcium in dairy, protein in pork, iron in beef, but because of the baggage that comes along with those foods, saturated fat, cholesterol, plant sources may be preferable. And then the baggage we get is fiber and folate and phytonutrients, etc. I would like to see the committee be more explicit, though. Right? When Eat More recommendations are given, the messaging is clear. Increase intake of fruits and vegetables. Right? But when there's a conflict between the USDA's role to protect America's health, but at the same time promote agricultural products, we hear more kind of cryptic biochemical components like reduce intake of solid fats, major sources of saturated and trans fatty acids. Right? How about eat less cheese? Or a guideline like drink less soda, or eat less meat, particularly processed meat. The American Institute for Cancer Research doesn't pull punches, just says processed meat like bacon, sausage, and cold cuts should be avoided, period. Right? They're not trying to sell food, they're just trying to prevent cancer. I'm not here today on behalf of the broccoli lobby. I am not here on behalf of any financial interests. I'm here as a physician representing the interests of the hundreds of thousands of Americans that continue to suffer and die from chronic disease, and you can help them by recommending a more plant-based diet. Thank you.
Our fifth presenter is Ted Barnett, Monroe County Medical Society.
My name is Ted Barnett. I'm a physician from Rochester, New York, where I have been practicing medicine for over 27 years. I have come at my own expense to make the case that recommendations to consume dairy should be removed from the dietary guidelines. I majored in biology at Yale, where I received my BS in 1976. I was a medical student and radiology resident at Tufts. I am board certified in diagnostic imaging, as well as in vascular and interventional radiology, which includes the performance of arterial angioplasty and stent placement. 23 years ago, like any good parents, my wife and I decided to perform an experiment on our children. We adopted a vegan diet, a diet devoid of all animal products. The experiment was a success. All 5 of us are still thriving on a vegan diet. Our kids are now 26, 24, and 21. They are trim and athletic and performing well in college and graduate school. In fact, I've had the distinct pleasure of sending a fortune in tuition checks to some of the finest educational institutions in America, including Oberlin, Colgate, NYU, and Yale. As someone who uses angioplasty and stents to treat blocked arteries, I have seen the havoc that the American diet plays on our vessels. I'm well paid for repairing this damage, and I greatly enjoy doing it. However, even though it is not in my economic self-interest, I feel I have a duty to promote a plant-based diet to help reduce the need for my services. Everyone has the right to know that atherosclerosis and other chronic illnesses can be largely avoided and even reversed with a whole food plant-based diet devoid of dairy and other animal products. In keeping with that, dietary recommendations should make it clear that dairy is not essential. Marketing by the dairy industry has led most Americans to believe that they require the calcium in dairy for healthy bones. The truth is that scientific studies do not support this contention. This committee acknowledged as much when the rationale given in the 2005 Dietary Guidelines for raising the recommended dairy intake from 2 cups to 3 cups per day was not that we needed more calcium, but that we needed more potassium. An article in the Wall Street Journal on August 30th, 2004 described this as a major victory for the $50 billion U.S. dairy industry, which has long lobbied for increased consumption guidelines. The journal attributed the 50% increase in recommended dairy servings to skillful lobbying based on research funded by the National Dairy Council, as well as the financial ties of several members of the advisory committee to dairy trade groups. The dairy lobby's success can be seen at the USDA's website, which recommends that we consume the equivalent of 3 cups of milk per day, regardless of our age, weight, or activity level, while the recommendation for all other foods varies up and down with those factors. This for a product that is completely unnecessary. This committee has assumed a daunting responsibility. You will know you have done your job well if there is an uproar after you issue your report. Removing from the dietary guidelines any requirement for dairy would have immense political implications, but it is the right thing to do, and I urge the committee to do it. Thank you.